remembered on my own. Hello, Melissa. I'll wait for you to. I see you. I can't hear you yet.
There we go.
Wonderful.
How's that? I'm used to the Microsoft Teams, so Zoom always throws me off of it.
Yeah, fair enough. So Melissa is from Addictions and Mental Health, Kingston, Frontenac, Lennox, and Addington. So just a quick recap for our volunteers. We cover 3 catchment areas: Hastings, Prince Edward, and Lennox and Addington. So Melissa kind of works for Addiction and Mental Health that covers the Lennox and Addington component of the agencies or the catchment areas that we cover. And I'm kind of throwing on this on you last minute, Melissa, but just maybe distinguish if you know that there are differences between what your agency does and what Hastings Prince Edward does for addictions and mental health. So just to provide some clarity there.
Yeah.
So that is kind of an ongoing confusion or roadblock you'll run into when providing supports to victims in our catchment areas, because we have 3 different counties. And I find the divide is Hastings, Prince Edward, and then Lennox and Addington and Kingston. And we kind of blend those 3 together for us. So having to be mindful of what county you're in to know where to refer those clients and what supports you may be receiving for or wanting to reach out to for the folks you're supporting. So as I said, Melissa's from Addictions and Mental Health, and we'll be speaking about Kingston, Frontenac, Lennox, and Addington side of our catchment area. So I will, without further ado, turn it over to Melissa.
Okay. Hi, everyone. Thanks, Stella, for inviting me on behalf of our organization. So yeah, I guess in terms of the HPE component, there's a lot of differences, I would say, among the 2 agencies in a lot of this service delivery. So there's a lot of programs that our organization offers that may not be offered through HPE. We find that our catchment area sometimes does blend a bit, but KFLA, we do go to Tyendinaga, so as far as that. But I know that HPE does sometimes come and cross those lines as well and into Deserano. So in terms of like specific programs that, to my knowledge, that are offered maybe at HPE and not at ours or vice versa, there may be a few, such as that I'll maybe talk about a little bit later, but a couple maybe our MCERT teams, so our mobile crisis teams, in which we work directly with Kingston Police or OPP through a crisis worker program. So I'll talk a little bit more about that later on. We also have a Motherwise program, which is part of our addiction team. And I'm not sure that Hastings Prince Edward offers that program as well. So that's a really good program for women who have children who may be involved with family and children's services and have presenting addiction issues or mental health issues. And it's sort of like a case management program. So I'm pretty sure that HP wouldn't offer that as well. But again, we might want to look at down the road, clearing some of those boundaries to know the differences. So I'll stop going on my convo about that. And I want to introduce myself a little bit. So as Stella mentioned, so my name is Melissa Switzer-Ferguson. I'm employed with Addiction Mental Health and have been working at the agency since 2008. And I've worked in various programs and roles within the agency throughout the years. So both in addiction programming, mental health, more crisis-oriented programs, and some family resource programs as well. So currently I'm on our intake team. So I'm acting as a coordinator as part of that team, which is essentially providing initial access to services and supports. And we view it as sort of one of our front doors to the agency. So we have a number of front doors or access points, which I'll talk about throughout my presentation as well. So we're a good access point for clients themselves who want to reach out to some services or get some information about what we have to offer or how we can support them. It's a good access point for referral sources. So we get a lot of referrals from doctors, social workers, hospital workers. ER is a good one. We work collaboratively with the ER at both, I would say Belleville, as well as Napanee and Kingston, hotel due included. And then also a good access point for just maybe another community partner, such as victim services or other counseling services within our organizations, community, that might be just wanting some general information. So we do take a lot of calls every day, and a lot of them too sometimes end up being from out of province, about people who are moving back to the area or looking for some services to be connected to. So we get a lot of general calls through our intake team. So essentially, Addiction Mental Health, KFLA, is a community-based, non-for-profit addiction and mental health service. So we provide supports to the entire KFLA region, which is, as you know, a big catchment area. So our services are very diverse and dynamic in that we go as far as the very rural areas, such as like Madoc and Northbrook and Charlotte Lake and North Frontenac that way. So our agency, I would say, has worked very hard and diligently to make sure that all of the services are equitable, given the differences between our rural and urban communities. So working really hard to increase accessibility for people, especially when people don't have transportation or may not have a family doctor or some of those resources. So essentially our agency offers, and this might be a low ball number, but over 20 essential services and programs that again are very diverse and specialized. So just to name sort of a few of those, we do offer a rehabilitative housing program. We have one in Napanee, a couple in Kingston, I'd say more than a couple in Kingston, to varying levels of support that we offer. And some of those homes would offer like 24/7 rehabilitation for mental health, addictions, and other kind of high needs health issues. And then we also offer a variety of youth and addiction mental health specific programs, justice services, court supports, court diversion programs, Family Resource Center, which is a great resource for family members. So whether a family member is looking for their own counseling to help maybe cope with their loved one's addiction or mental health issues, we have a number of resources, hoping to get some groups running maybe once we move out of lockdown and things sort of get back to normal to some degree. So a really good resource there. And we actually have the direct number on our website. So if you're finding that you may know someone as in a family member position or a concerned person, then please visit our website and you can find the family resource information. And there's just a general line that you can call. We have a couple workers that will answer that number Monday to Friday between, I would say, 8 to 4. So some other programs that we offer, of course, addiction-specific programs, addiction-specific groups, lots of varying mental health programs. So whether someone needs short-term immediate support now versus maybe some longer term case management type support where someone may need community connections or access to psychiatry, things like that. And then, of course, problem gambling, we do offer, or some behavioral addiction counseling. So things like pornography, we do have a couple workers on our problem gambling and addiction team that would also support those needs for people. And then, of course, LGBTQ and other priority populations. We've launched a few new programs to help support people in those kind of high risk priority populations as well. So ultimately, our mission is to work collaboratively with our community partners in order to enhance like the client experience and the flow of which they might access programs, because there may not be there may be someone who comes to us and they're a perfect candidate for case management, but they may also require some trauma work. So in those instances, we're definitely trauma informed agency, but we don't offer trauma specific services. So in those situations, we would recommend like the Center for Trauma and Abuse in Kingston as a longer term sort of trauma specialty. So again, we want to make sure that like our clients are accessing person-centered supports. We recognize that, you know, there isn't a one glove fits all model out there. So ensuring that services are, you know, diverse to their unique needs. And some of these partnerships as well, I mean, it's a long list and many years of working to build those community partnerships with people. But again, so the hospitals are definitely priority on that list. Providence Care, they have a lot of different programs as well in our Kingston Napanee region that are very supportive. So we work collaboratively with those. Home-based housing in Kingston, I guess you wouldn't work so much with Kingston, but just throw that out there. OPP, Frontenac Police, Kingston Police, Interval House, and then we have a lot of working teams with like family health teams and doctors in the area. So our intake team kind of takes a big role in working with, you know, local family health systems to discuss cases that might be high risk, but keeping it confidential at the same time. So, you know, again, in just hopes that people can get connected quickly and reduce sort of crisis situations. So moving on to crisis-oriented programs, we have, again, a number of those, which is probably, you know, when it comes to victim services in your roles as volunteers, this is probably the information that you're most looking for. But so crisis-oriented programs and outreach teams are meant to offer immediate support, urgent support to those in escalating crisis situations. So whether that be mental health or addictions, could be homelessness, right? It could be a traumatic event that's occurred, things like that. So these services also aim to reduce police contact or contact with criminal justice services, and of course, reduce the risk, if at all possible, for hospitalizations, even sort of diversion from emergency rooms, because a lot of our emergency rooms do see that high rate of mental health visits. So we work hard to kind of divert those as much as possible. So we also offer a crisis line. Not sure how aware you are of that, but it's 24/7. So, you know, around the clock, crisis workers will answer the phone. Again, both available in Napanee, Kingston areas. The pandemic has slightly, I guess, impacted the way that our crisis service does work, meaning that our walk-in component isn't quite available. We keep the doors locked, obviously, just to reduce risk right now. So for example, in our Napanee office, we do have a doorbell. So if someone happens to, you know, we might have like a regular crisis client, so they'll know, just come ring the doorbell, we'll come out and see what's going on for them in that moment. So we still have the walk-in component, it's just a bit different. It probably has been like that for over a year now. But again, in saying that, a quick call to the crisis line within minutes, you know, depending on their location, we can be there, right? We can go on a mobile, or we can say, hey, can you come into the office in the next 15 minutes or 10 minutes, depending on, you know, staffing, things like that. And someone can be seen still very promptly. So again, around like the mobile outreaches, if required, the mobile crisis worker will kind of assess the situation, see what is needed, and then we would go out. So we would, again, referrals can come from the individuals themselves in that crisis, requiring that contact, family members. Of course, confidentiality is really important. So in those moments where a family member might reach out, we would obviously say, like, where is your loved one? Are we able to talk to them? Can they give us a call, just to make sure, we're ethically following confidentiality? And then again, please call our crisis team quite frequently, just to recommend maybe a check-in with someone, or some follow-up. Hospitals call, and of course, other community partners can request any mobile outreach services as well. So we have some other crisis-oriented services. One is called a Safe Bed program. This has been running for a number of years, including in our Napanee area. We did offer it at one time in our Napanee location, but then it did get moved. But even though it's moved to Kingston, again, Napanee resources can still access it. So essentially, the Safe Bed program is a short-term residential placement for people experiencing pretty severe mental health issues or crisis. Homelessness is often a component where, like, they have nowhere to go and they just need a safe place for a short amount of time. And this can be, it's really dependent on the situation, but we can offer, I think it's up to 21 days of a placement, and then they can work on site with some mental health workers to figure out, like, what's your next step, what's your plan to de-escalate any crisis situations, and link them with other community partners, whatever that might look like. The thing about the Safe Bed program is that it is by police referral only. So not just anyone can refer. So usually this individual has came into contact recently with the police, and then the police, I'd say most of the police officers in our area are aware of this program, but I think there probably are still some that aren't, or knowing that, oh yeah, that is an option, right, that we can help these people with. So that's a really good crisis program we have. Another one is called, it's newer, last couple of years, called MCERT. So Mobile Crisis Rapid Response Team. And so this is, we have a few dedicated workers. So in Kingston, for example, MCERT would include a team of mobile crisis workers and some ununiformed police officers. So then if there are any calls that were mental health or addiction related, then the police officer and the mobile crisis worker would go out to the location together. The hope here is, again, to divert, any contact with criminal justice system charges, increase the accessibility to mental health support and referrals and follow-up, and offer some stabilization to that individual, whatever that looks like. So then the crisis worker would assess the situation and say, hey, like, do you want to continue working with maybe our team, or would you benefit, having a connection with someone for even a short term, or trying to assess what they need in that moment, or even long-term referrals. We have a very similar program in South Frontenac as well, just with a different worker. And then in Lennox and Addington, we do offer this program as well. It's just called something a little bit different, and it's called Mobile Crisis Intervention Team. And our worker is Shelley Hagerman, that works in the area for that. So I don't know, some of you might come into contact with her eventually, but again, so the role is for her to go out with a police officer, pair up, go to any dispatch calls that are addiction or mental health related, or high risk in the sense of mental health, homelessness, those kind of factors. And then Shelley would assess and refer and likely be in contact with one of me, so someone from the intake team, to complete an internal referral. In those moments, our intake team it would be unlikely that we would then contact that individual and complete an assessment, because we want to make sure that individual gets transferred to a waiting list as soon as possible. Yeah, and then essentially referrals to our services can be made a number of ways. So again, by calling either one of our crisis teams, I guess for you guys it would be Lennox and Addington. You can call our intake team. I'd be happy to share that number, even if it's a general inquiry, right, a referral. You can make a referral online through our website, and anyone can. So if you go to our website, and there's a drop-down menu and it says get help, you can make a referral, a professional's referral on behalf of someone. A lot of referrals, I guess, in that area would come from like doctors, social workers, maybe, like Stella, things like that. And then people can also self-refer. So if you ever come in contact with someone who is maybe unsure, but you think that they might benefit from some of our services, please, I encourage you to, say, hey, just go to the website if they're ambivalent, right? Because you don't want to, push people too far, but just in a general way to say, yeah, you can self-refer anytime. Yeah, and I think those are the main ways. Of course, fax, we accept faxes, but those are more non-urgent referrals. I think that's sort of the end of what I was hoping to share. Is there anything, Stella, that you wanted me to touch on?
No, I think you've really given a broad picture of what your agency can offer, and I'll open it up if anybody has any questions, or if they need clarifying on anything, and then I'll let you go, and then I'll kind of do maybe an example of when we've utilized your services that way. You don't need to stick around.
You don't need a case study.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay, no problem.
So does anybody have any questions at all for Melissa, of just any clarifying? It's just a good general nature of to know what those agencies can offer, because when you are on scene with someone that has experienced a trauma, often crisis can follow that, and knowing what services that you can regurgitate or what they can kind of expect from addictions and mental health is really helpful. And just having those nuggets of information is just being able to talk and kind of give someone hope that there are services out there that they can get connected with, and you kind of know the avenues and can help them navigate to get there is really important and beneficial in supporting folks on scene.
Absolutely. And I urge everyone to, if you are interested or want to do some sidebar training there on your own, but our website is full of information about other programs that I didn't even mention. So feel free to go on there and take a look as well.
Awesome.
Okay.
Well, thank you, Melissa, for your time. That was super helpful.
Great. Thanks
I
for
wish you all the best.
You too. Yeah, take care, everybody. Bye.
Bye. All right, Melissa's left. One thing I wanted to kind of elaborate on, I don't want you sitting there thinking you're going to be on call with people in crisis or having like a mental health breakdown, because that's not a support that we are called out to. But however, they sometimes go hand in hand. So if someone's kind of experienced a traumatic loss or a tragedy in itself, and they're in crisis or in shock, that oftentimes police may ask addictions and mental health to come on scene. They will dispatch crisis on their own. But if it is strictly someone that is having like a significant mental health breakdown, we are not utilized by police. They know that there kind of has to be a crime or a tragic circumstance involved in that in order for us to dispatch our volunteers. So it's good information to have, that kind of what the agency can provide. But I don't want you worried or concerned or scared that we're going to send you out to support someone with like schizophrenia or bipolar or some of those mental health disorders, which again, as I said, sometimes go hand in hand, but very seldomly. If someone's that unwell, police are just taking them to KGH or getting the crisis team involved, and they're bypassing victim services as an entirety. And then we are given kind of the number for follow-up support following the crime. Does that make sense? What I'm regurgitating, because sometimes I don't actually know if I make any sense when I talk.
No, it makes perfect sense. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Shiloh. Ashley has actually already joined is waiting in the waiting room. So I'm going to bring her in. So Ashley's from Rushnell Funeral Services. And just to we send volunteers out on a lot of sudden death calls, sudden death, suicide. And Ashley has a lot of good information and nuggets of information of what to expect from the funeral arrangements. So this would be a good one to kind of make your own notes from, because those are a lot of questions family have on scene when you're providing that support. I'll let kind of, like, every time I hear Ashley speak, there's something else that I learn, because that's not a lot of, I don't get much involved with the funeral home process, but funeral homes are able to provide quite a extensive amount of support and information. So I'm going to bring her in a few minutes early. Hopefully she's ready. Hello, Ashley. We're ready for you. You're still muted.
Sorry.
That's okay.
Okay.
I can hear you now.
Perfect. So you just
Welcome.
want to go ahead and start?
Well, I can give an introduction that you're Ashley Rushnell from Rushnell Funeral Services, and you're a funeral director and have given quite a few presentations to our new recruits and volunteers, which we so appreciate, and you're very knowledgeable, and we always take so much information away from when you chat. So I want to give you as much airtime as possible, because I know you have a lot of information that I think is really beneficial for our volunteers to hear.
Well,
you can take it over.
Okay, perfect. Well, thanks for having me again. I always enjoy doing this. So anytime. And there will be a time for questions, I guess, at the end, right? So, okay. So I'll just start off by kind of explaining a little bit about what we do as a funeral home. So I'm a third generation funeral director. We have a family owned group of funeral homes. So we have 8 locations across the Quinte area. So we serve pretty well everywhere between Brighton and I guess soon to be Tweed and Madoc and Marmora. So we definitely deal with different counties when it comes to needing assistance through either victim services or social services or anything like that with the families that we deal with. So basically what we do is we're a funeral service. So we offer burials, cremations. When somebody passes away, we're usually the first point of contact. Whether they pass away at a hospital, nursing home, residence. If it's a sudden death, then usually the police would contact us once, the coroner has attended the scene, but we can get further into that in a minute here. But basically what happens is we'll sit with families, we go over arrangements, the family decides what sort of services they're looking at having, and then we carry out those services from start to finish. So we also own our own crematorium as well. So that does play a huge part for some families, because they do like the fact that their loved one doesn't really have to be transferred out of our care. So we can pretty much look after them from start to finish without having to transfer them to an outside crematorium or anything like that. So once the family comes in, decides the types of service that they want to have, then we'll go ahead with either the cremation or the burial. And then we do several in-between steps that kind of help walk them through the whole grieving process and put them into contact with various different people that they might need to deal with throughout the way. So say if they have a service, they're dealing with a minister, or they're dealing with cemetery, churches, things like that. So after the fact, what we do is we do follow-up appointments. So we look after making sure that families don't just feel like the point of contact ends just at the funeral. We try and emphasize that with people, that they can come back to us if they have any questions about, what happens next. We provide estate checklists, things like that, death certificates, If it's an elderly person, we take care of notifying Canada Pension. There's certain benefits that surviving spouses are entitled to. If it's somebody who has worked throughout their life, they're entitled to a Canada Pension death benefit, which is maximum $2,500. So we do all the paperwork for that. And we also provide, if, they want to take a look at earns or anything like that, then, we're a full service. So I know you guys pretty much, victim services deal with, the more sudden death side of things. So that kind of just gives you a sum of what we do as a whole through the funeral home, but I'll touch a little bit more on sudden death situations because I know that that's what you're here to learn about. So with sudden deaths, we never know, sometimes what the cause of death is. So when we get a call, we could get a call from police. We could get a call from the hospital if the person was transferred to the hospital with vital signs absent. We don't always know what the cause of death is going to be, but what we are concerned about is whether or not the person's going to be taken for an autopsy or not. So typically, just so you guys are aware, Belleville Hospital doesn't do autopsies anymore. So autopsies are generally done at Kingston Hospital. However, if it's a homicide, they're generally taken to the coroner's office in Toronto or Ottawa for forensics. So very rarely you would see a homicide victim being taken to Kingston. So they would either be taken to Toronto or Ottawa. And that's good for you guys to know because a lot of the times the family isn't even aware where their next of kin has been taken, because a lot of the times the either A, the family isn't paying attention because they've just been told that their loved one has suddenly passed away, or B, sometimes the police don't know where the body is going because that's up to the coroner to dictate that. So that's good background knowledge to keep in mind when somebody has passed away suddenly, is you want to find out where that person's being taken. So because you can generally guarantee with a suspicious circumstance or any sudden death that the body will be taken for an autopsy. So an autopsy is, for those of you who don't know what it is, it's a thorough examination of a body to find out what the cause of death is. And the autopsy does make the process a little bit lengthier on our side of things, because if the family is wishing to see the deceased, then there's more preparation involved in preparing that person for an open casket. So that's one thing that we always make the family aware of when they come in for the arrangements, is that we do need more time when somebody has been taken for an autopsy. And there's a little bit more careful consideration put into what types of arrangements are going to take place for that person, because sometimes the casket may not be suitable to be open to the public. Sometimes it might be suggested that the family come in and have a few moments to themselves. And that's generally decided at the time when we receive the person back from the hospital after the autopsy has taken place. So we've had victim services volunteers before come in and sit down with families while they've been making the arrangements in the office, just to support the family. There's various different ways that families can be supported throughout the whole process. Now, I'm not sure with COVID if some things might have changed. Like, you guys used to be able to go to the hospital, right? Can you still do that, or?
Yeah, we have been,
Yeah.
not as frequently, but in circumstances, the
Okay.
hospital is allowing us in to provide that support.
Okay. That's good. Good to know, because I wasn't sure if that changed with COVID or anything. And it hasn't really changed on our side of things, because we understand that people need support when they're coming in to make arrangements in our facilities as well. So with our services, we deal with a great number of police, paramedics, fire department, and I'm sure that, you know, that's something that you guys will do as well. And I mean, with that, I always say that sometimes just being there as a support is great. A lot of the times there's nothing that you can say that's going to make a family feel better about just losing somebody suddenly. So, I mean, a lot of the times just listening and knowing that they have a point of contact that can even coordinate, you know, maybe even making funeral arrangements, just setting up an appointment is very helpful to a lot of families, because a lot of families can't take that first step. So something that we find in this industry is families are lost. They don't know what to do after somebody passes away suddenly. And my family's experienced sudden loss before, and you're in a completely different state of mind when you're dealing with something like that. And so to have someone kind of guide you through and let you know the things that you're supposed to be doing during this time, it's very helpful to those families. So just one thing that I always suggest is the funeral home should be one of the first phone calls that a family makes. There's always a lot of phone calls that are made when somebody passes away, but the focus is mostly on the deceased, right? And it's getting them and bringing them back home. So if that means that they're from out of town and they passed away while they were here, then the focus is on bringing them back to where they need to be. Or if they were taken for an autopsy to Toronto or Ottawa, the focus would be on getting their body back to whatever place that they call home as fast as possible. So that means that the family, you know, has to pick up the phone during that difficult time, give us a call, and set up the arrangements for them to come in. And in that time, a lot of people think that they have all the time in the world when it's something like that, but time is not always on our side in certain circumstances. When we need to act fast, if the family is going to want to see the person shortly after they passed away. Now I know that you guys still offer, if the deceased meets the criteria, there's an allowance that victim services will pay for the funeral expenses. Is it still up to 5,000? Yeah. So that helps.
That's just to clarify, that's just for homicide families to
Okay.
our new recruits that may have not known that. So
Yeah,
just any homicide.
touched on that with them yet or not, but
Yeah.
We've had families that have been assisted before, and it's a great assistance to these families that are not prepared for something like that financially. So, I mean, all in all, we will do whatever the family wants. I think the key point that I always try to get across is just, I know there's always tons of phone calls that have to be made after somebody has passed, but we try and be the first point of contact with the family after they've lost somebody, just to kind of get the ball rolling on paperwork and things like that. So I can kind of touch on a whole bunch of different things, but I kind of want to know what you guys want to know. So if you guys want to ask questions now, you can go ahead, and because I mean, I can keep talking about what our services are and
one of the things I like when you explain is how there's always a funeral home on call that comes and gets the body to provide that transport, but it doesn't necessarily mean that the family has to go with that funeral home.
Yes.
Because I know
So
that's been a point of contention for some of the clients I've supported on scene. So if you can just go into that.
perfect. So with our 8 locations, as I was saying, we have somebody on call every night. So 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. We always have a funeral director on call. So what happens if the person's passed away in a nursing home, hospital, residence, the family or the nursing staff, they'll contact us. They'll let the answering service know that a death has occurred, and then they'll patch the call through directly to us. So we're the ones taking the information. So what happens when we go and pick somebody up that, say the family hasn't requested us, but say the hospital either needs the body picked up right away, nursing home needs the body picked up right away, or they need somebody transferred for an autopsy right away, they'll just call any funeral home to do it in the area. But that doesn't mean that if you've dealt with a particular funeral home in the past, that you can't have the particular funeral home that you want to pick up the deceased from, the either if the deceased was brought back to the funeral home for us to hold the body so that the hospital or nursing home has room, or say if we took the person to Ottawa, Kingston, or Toronto for an autopsy, then we don't have to be the ones picking that person up again. Another funeral home of their choice would pick that person up. So the family at the end of the day has say in who they want to use. So a lot of the times, like funeral home A will pick up somebody who has passed away suddenly. The police will call them and have them do the transfer in the middle of the night, right? And then when the person has been released, so when the autopsy has been completed at the hospital, then the family will be made aware that the person has been released by the coroner. So the coroner will call the family and say, so-and-so has been released at the hospital. You can go ahead and call the funeral home and let them know that they can go and pick them up. And that at that point in time, the family has a say in which funeral home they call to pick the person up and to bring them home. So does that clarify everything?
It does for me. I mean, you're very good at delivering that information.
Thanks. No, and I mean, I guess the other thing too that I should touch on is never assume that something's going to be communicated to a family, because we've had instances before where like there's a certain protocol that's supposed to take place. So if you're saying, in an ideal situation, the person has passed away, the police would contact the coroner. The coroner would rule whether or not there's going to be an autopsy. At that point, then the police would dictate who the funeral home is based on a rotational schedule that's coming and picking the deceased up and transferring them to the hospital for the autopsy. Then when the autopsy is completed, the coroner is supposed to call the family, let the family know that the autopsy's been completed, and then the family is supposed to call us. But that's not always an ideal situation. There's always miscommunication errors between the very first point of contact with an emergency personnel and then us, right? So what I always suggest, no matter what, and I sound like a broken record because I've already said it twice, but it's just have the family call. Because what happens is we end up getting into contact with the hospital. We'll set everything up with the family. We'll contact the police and find out more details if we need to regarding, if the family has questions on whether or not their loved one can be viewed. The police can sometimes give us, a heads up on certain information. So it's better for us to be able to make all of those phone calls before the family even comes into the office, so that we are prepared at what to tell them when they come in, than for us to be put on the spot and not know any answers to their questions before they come in. So we've had coroners before that have forgotten to call the family and not told the family that their loved one has been released from the hospital and that the autopsy's been completed. So we've had families waiting for days where it's been like, okay, their loved one has been sitting in the morgue in the hospital and the autopsy's been completed, but no one's called them to let them know that it's been finished. So we've had those circumstances before where we've kind of just had people waiting to be contacted. Meanwhile, if they picked up the phone and called us, we would have been able to get the ball rolling and gotten their loved one brought back to us. So
I'll have you review like the financial side of things. So obviously that's a big concern, with, especially with sudden deaths. If they can't afford it, or that financial piece is going to be a big stressor. And like, not that you have to go into big depth, but like, what are some of the funding sources you've touched on that victim services can fund in the instant of a homicide? But obviously there's lots of other deaths that occur out there that families may need some additional support.
So, I mean, luckily, like we did touch on the money that is allotted to families of victims of homicide, and that helps out greatly, because I mean, depending on the circumstances, I mean, we like to help out too, right? Like as a funeral home, we're locally owned. We, aren't a corporation. So, we have the ability to say, if a family really is struggling and if they really can't afford beyond the money that is allotted to them in the case of a homicide, then a lot of the times that we'll say, you know what, don't worry about it. It's fine. The balance is, just wiped. We don't have to worry about that. Other times, what happens is, say if the person is on ODSP, receiving assistance from the county. So if the person's on disability or receiving other benefits from the county, then what happens is the deceased is entitled to receive assistance from the county. Now, this is where it kind of gets a little bit confusing, because the county will cover all or nothing. So either they'll approve the services and they'll cover the full cost of the services, which again, we discount the cost of our services for. So the family's not charged a balance for that, or they don't approve it at all. So I actually worked close with Hastings County a couple of years ago, and we got it changed so that say if someone in the family can afford it, but the deceased couldn't, the deceased didn't have anything to their name, they used to means check the next of kin. So they used to say, okay, if your brother or your sister can afford to pay for it, then someone in the family has to pay for it. Even if, they weren't, say, a close family and say, might not even have a relationship with those people in their family. Hastings County, they would still expect for certain family members to step up to the plate and pay for the services. So they did change their protocol when it came to that. And what happens now is if somebody passes away who's on assistance, they're pretty well automatically approved for the cost of their services to be covered. But what happens is they have to call an intake access phone number that we provide to them. So the family still contacts us first, and then we give them typically the information, the intake access number to Hastings County. And then they'll have to go through a little bit of a process with them, and then they'll either be approved or denied for the cost of the services. So, I mean, that is one thing that, would be handy to have whoever's the first point of contact, if the family mentions that the deceased was on social assistance, ODSP, anything like that, say, oh, maybe have you tried calling Hastings County to see whether or not you would be approved for the coverage of the funeral expenses. So, I mean, if that's done before us, then that's great, because that makes our lives a lot easier, and it would make the family's life a lot easier if they were pointed in that direction right from the beginning. But unfortunately, families don't usually know that there is assistance there for funeral coverage until we get involved a lot of the time, and then we let them know that, you know, they don't have to be the ones responsible for paying the cost of the services for their loved one if the deceased couldn't afford to look after it. So.
And one thing I will clarify is that it doesn't matter whether they're on ODSP or Ontario Works, they're still calling Hastings County intake line.
They can still get approved if they're not on it. But what happens is they're pretty well automatically approved if they are receiving it. And then if they're not, they can still apply for it. It just might be a little bit longer of a process, because if they're not in the system already, it might take a little bit longer.
Fabulous.
I have a quick question, if you don't mind.
Yeah, go ahead, Jody.
Just circling back in terms of the transportation of a deceased person. Does that always occur with like a funeral home? And is there always a cost incurred for doing that, regardless of where you have to transport the body?
So we're a licensed funeral establishment. So one thing that I should have mentioned before is when somebody passes away, is when they've been declared deceased. Sorry, the light just shut off here. When they've been declared deceased, we're the only ones legally that can transfer a dead body from place of death, either back to our facilities or to another facility. So you have to have a special license for that, and all of our facilities are licensed to do that. There's different classes of licenses, so not all funeral homes are classed the same way. So some funeral homes are transfer services. So that means that like larger services in Toronto that just do body removal, that don't do funerals or anything like that, they are basically a funeral establishment but closed to the public, whereas we're a funeral establishment open to the public. So, you know, you would never see an ambulance transporting a deceased person unless they passed away in the ambulance on the way to the hospital, or you know, they had vital signs absent, but maybe, you know, there was some sort of a medical reason why they would be transported to the hospital to see if, you know, they might get vital signs back or anything like that. But there's always a cost incurred. So what happens is when the police dictate the transfer of a body that has passed away, say suddenly, like if it was a suicide or homicide or anything like that, the family's obviously not calling us for the transfer, the police is. So the police, based on our rotational schedule, this is why they try to keep it fair between all of the funeral homes, is because the government will actually pay for the transfer to the hospital of the coroner's choosing for the autopsy. And then sometimes they pay for the transfer back. If the deceased, say, lived in Belleville, the family resides in Belleville, but say the person was taken to Ottawa for an autopsy, well, the family shouldn't have to incur the cost of bringing the person back from Ottawa. So a lot of the times the government will pay for that, and we actually invoice the government separately for that. So that's generally not part of the services that Hastings County would cover or the family would pay for, or even victim services if there was funds being allotted there. We generally wouldn't put that as part of our costs. We would always invoice the government for that.
Awesome. Thank you so much.
Okay.
No,
And thank
that was
you
an
for
awesome
all of
question.
this information. This is really interesting to learn just for me.
Mhm.
So thank you.
Thanks.
Well, if there's no more questions, Ashley, you are free to go.
No more questions. Okay. Yeah, I mean, I try to touch a little bit on everything, and there's so much information that I could, get really in depth about certain things, but I don't want to confuse everyone. So we try to just touch mostly on the sudden death side of things for you guys. But if anyone has any questions that you think of at a later time, you can definitely contact me. I don't mind answering questions ever. So
You just send them to me, folks, and I'll make sure Ashley gets them.
perfect. All right.
Well, thank you for your time, Ashley. It's been
Great.
great seeing you again.
Take care. Thanks for having me.
Yeah.
Bye.
Bye. So we have a few minutes before Kristin jumps on, but I don't know if you guys want to like stand up, stretch, move your body, because I could do that. I'm going to go walk around my table and then I'm going to come back. So just take a few minutes and then I will let Kristin in. All right, I'm going to bring our next speaker in. So Kristin Farrell is from Three Oaks, and Three Oaks is in Belleville. It's a women's shelter that we will most likely utilize many times while on scene. I'll bring her in. Hi, Kristin. My computer just told me that I only had 10% battery life, so I had a minor panic attack, but we are plugged in and we are you're good to go now. So I will turn it over to Kristin. Kristin, we just kind of gave people a few minutes to get up and stretch. We've been sitting for an hour, so some people are just going to be coming back to join us here in a few seconds, hopefully, but
Okay.
You're welcome. I'm not sure how much. You have about a half an hour, and if you want to just jump right into it.
Sure.
And then do you like being interrupted with questions, or do you prefer to be asked at the end?
So,
how do you like?
No, I have that in kind of in my introduction here to just ask as we go.
Okay.
You know, I think we forget things by the end, and then later tonight you'll remember a question, right? So, so a disclaimer: I have 3 children at home, and they're all dispersed elsewhere in the house right now with promises to be very quiet. So. All right, so I'm Kristin Farrell. I'm the Training and Education Coordinator at Three Oaks Foundation. I have been with the shelter since 2009 and officially in the position of Training and Education since 2017. So I feel like I have credit when I talk about what goes on in the shelter in terms of what happens. And I have had the opportunity to work with victim services via our crisis line, arriving at the shelter, and then in different levels of terms of when they're working directly with victim services in that manner. So feel free, yes, as I go throughout the next few minutes, just ask if a question comes up, just pop on and just shout it out. As always, we might end up exploring some kind of a topic around violence against women in the next few minutes that could be triggering for anyone. So please take time for yourself after your training today, and talk with victim services too if there's something that comes up that triggers you. So what is Three Oaks Foundation? So Three Oaks provides shelter and services to women who experience domestic violence, and we are funded by the Ministry of Community, Children, and Social Services for all of Hastings and Prince Edward County. We provide, so the basics of our operation in terms of what most people know is our 24-hour crisis line and our emergency bed shelter. In addition to those services, we also have community-based counseling, so family court support, transitional, children's counseling, and our second stage housing unit. So it's rent geared to income, and it's 8 units. They're self-contained, so it's a woman's risk would be a bit different moving from shelter into our second stage housing unit. Today, I want to focus on the relationship between Three Oaks and victim services. What it might look like when you're working with a woman, when you're on scene and you're doing, we call it like a safe, warm handover to Three Oaks Foundation, what it looks like if she denies the referral that you give her to Three Oaks, and how to kind of navigate that as well. With that being said, I'll send Stella an email right after I speak with the crisis line and our toll-free number, but also my contact as well. Because we're only here for a short time, if you have any questions, you feel free to just call me anytime about anything. But also our crisis line serves as that purpose to our community as well. The other kind of caveat I talk about is this presentation won't be just for you as your role as victim services. 1 in 3 women will experience domestic violence. You are going to know somebody who you might want to provide a referral to our services, or just to discuss that you're aware that the service is in our community. So if you have a pen and paper handy, I'll give you our crisis line right now. And that's operational 24 hours. You can call if you have a friend that you want to know how to have a conversation with, a coworker you don't know what to do. Is this domestic violence? Any question you have. So it's 613-966-3074. And kind of depending on where you are in Hastings and Prince Edward, we also have a toll-free number. So 1-800-267-0533. Actually, let me just put those in the chat right now.
I already put them in there for you.
Oh, perfect. Thank you. All right. Okay. So imperative to know about our services. They're confidential, and that's imperative for the woman's safety, that all of our services are confidential. We would never disclose should a woman be residing at the shelter if she isn't at the shelter. And all our calls are anonymous. So when I say that it's anonymous, it means you can call the crisis line as many times as you like, get referrals to community programs, talk about your rights and information, what isn't abuse, safety planning, but it would be when she would want to access our shelter or our community outreach program that we're going to need to know who she is coming into our buildings. We're also self-referring. And what that means for us as a feminist organization, it's a choice to access our services, and it's a choice to end her services or not access our services. I'll admit I struggled with that a bit when I first started at Three Oaks, because women would disclose some very challenging, difficult, horrific stories to us. We want to fix people. That's what we do as humans. We want to help people. We want to impart our wisdom on people. But at the end of the day, it comes down to the most dangerous time for a woman is when she leaves her abusive partner or when she's preparing to leave. So we want it to be her choice to access our services. She's also the expert on the violence that she's experienced, and she knows her partner better than anyone else. So a quick stat to follow that up with, and in 2020, on average in Canada, every 2.5 days, a woman or a child was killed as a result of domestic violence. So there were 40 women in that number in Ontario. So over half of those women that were killed in Canada, I don't have the actual stat on what it is, but it's over half of those women that were killed. They were they had recently separated, filed for divorce, or had left their abusive partner. So this is why we don't force women to access our services or to stay. And it gets really hard when it's personal. If it's a friend or a family member who comes to you, you just want to say, why haven't you left? And you might find yourself in that position should you ever be on scene with somebody. So I'm going to talk you through how to have a conversation with somebody should she disclose to you, or your gut tells you that this isn't right, maybe this is happening. So what happens when you call Three Oaks Foundation? It's going to be answered by a Three Oaks staff. We always have somebody there 24 hours. The first question most times that you are going to be asked is whether or not you're safe. Why we ask that question is we don't want somebody talking if their partner's right beside them or in the home. If she needs police, fire, or ambulance called immediately, we'll stay on the line with her. The other line will be calling one of those services that she requests. So say you're calling for a woman, you're on scene. Let us know who you are, that you're with someone, and chances are you're only making the call to us should she ask you to. She might identify something to you, and you might feel that what she's identified to you would qualify her to stay within our services, and then she gets on the phone and won't say a word to us. And that's happened, and it happens with other services in the community too. But we want to make sure that she wants our services. One of our retired managers, I should say, not old manager, she used to say that we're planting the seed in women. So I might be out at a speak in the community, who knows where it is, and I might talk about our services. And as I'm speaking in public and I'm looking around, I can tell sometimes who's uncomfortable with the topic that I'm addressing. And I would never want to call anyone out, but it might be a couple weeks later that someone will call the crisis line and say that I was there and I talked about abuse and I talked about a form of abuse, and it resonated with them. But it might have taken them a couple weeks or even months to call our services. It's when she's ready to call, when she feels that she's ready to take that next step. So what happens when you're on scene? So I've been talking, let's say before the pandemic, before the last year, I was working with a lot of the responders throughout Hastings and Prince Edward County to talk about to work with them of how to support women when they're on scene. So my husband's a volunteer fire department, and he had a couple calls. He's on a volunteer fire department, sorry. And he had a couple of calls that he went to that were house structure fires, called in as house structure fires. And when him and his department got there, there were things that they were viewing, that they saw, that alarmed them that there just was something else that was happening and they didn't feel prepared. So it was a conversation with them and another shelter in the province that we started our local public education called #SheCouldBe, to sort of better prepare our first responders to for a disclosure or what happens when you're on scene, and things that they could look for. Sometimes our first responders, or any of you in your position with victim services, you may be the first person she discloses to ever. That's a really big thing to hold on your shoulders, that you are the first person she might have disclosed to you. Flip side, what I have heard in my experience at the shelter is I tried to reach out to somebody, whether it's Belleville City Police, whether it's a fire department or a paramedic, and they judged me, they shut me down, they questioned me what I was doing to provoke his anger. And so think of yourself in any situation that you might have been in and somebody wants to know what you did to cause the problem. We don't want to do that when we're working with victims of domestic violence. Listening, we want to listen to them. We want to provide them with an opportunity to tell their side of the story. It's not our position to judge, and even in our role at Three Oaks, it's not our position to decide who is right or who is wrong, but to provide her with the supports that she's seeking. So you might know who she is, you may know who her partner is, and that's also difficult in the community that we are. Hastings and Prince Edwards is a huge geographical area, but it's also really small community. So sometimes we do know the people that we're working with. One other factor that I talk about a lot is unpacking any of our preset views that we have towards domestic violence or violence against women. Sometimes I've come across people who were raised in a home where domestic violence was present, and they knew it was happening, but their mother denied it, or mom just kind of went on and did what she did for the sake of the family. So you want to really address those and understand maybe what our own viewpoints are before we have conversations with anyone should she disclose. Just checking time here. So important to know that violence is a choice, and it's the choice of the perpetrator, and it's not a random act, I should say. Most times I would venture to guess that if you are on scene supporting a woman, you're at the tip of the iceberg. It's probably the escalation of the event that you're there to support her. So you haven't been there for the years of emotional and psychological trauma, financial abuse, things that kind of go on in the background that tend to make it seem like to people that domestic violence is a private matter where it shouldn't be viewed that way. So understanding that there are many reasons why women stay, and I'll admit it will be frustrating for you that should you pass on a referral to someone on scene to our services and she says, no, thank you. You've planted that seed with her, that maybe a couple days later when she's in a better mindset, to really think about the conversation that you had with her. And one trick or tip I've passed on to other people is just say, hey, Kristin from Three Oaks was in talking to me. We learned about the services in our community. Are you familiar with Three Oaks? Now, the other piece is you're not going to want to have that conversation if he is present, if he's with her. You want to make sure that you can separate the two of them. She's not going to disclose if he's there. But also you might see the looks that he's giving her, the body language. She might flow in conversation with you, and then he comes back into the picture and she shuts down. She avoids eye contact. He answers all the questions for her. Many women stay because there's a lack of resources for them in the community, or a lack of knowledge of the resources in the community for her. We often hear from women that their abusers will tell them that the abuse isn't severe enough to access our services, or I don't hit you, so you don't deserve to access services at Three Oaks. If you disclose emotional, verbal, psychological, financial, any form of abuse to us over the crisis line, you fit our mandate. So we do have to make sure that in our public education pieces, we're talking about those factors. And it doesn't mean that he's been physically abusing a woman for years before a severe incident happens. It could be years of the psychological trauma that she's experienced. So trust your instinct. You all registered, enlisted to be volunteers with victim services. There's a reason for that. You have empathy, you're compassionate, you care about people in your community. So trust your instincts. Whatever your background is, besides being a volunteer with victim services, you have that innate passion to help other people. And you probably can tell when something's, when you walk in a room and you feel the tension, you can pick those pieces up. So trust your instinct and take a moment to look around at what's going on in the scene, and then start that conversation with her when he is not with her. And it might be simple things as, has there ever been an incident that's happened before like this in your house? You might notice that there's markings on her, like old bruising, or she's wearing long sleeves and maybe she might pull them up quickly and there's some old bruising, but there's some fresh bruising, or she's complaining about something. Really talk to her about those and identify them. And sometimes we have to, for lack of a better term, like hit the nail on the head and just say what it is, what you see, and she might deny it and she might not. And then if you get to the point where you have to speak to a police officer who's on scene, or even you're talking to us, just state the facts. Say what she said, what you saw. Don't elaborate in terms of what you may think, but just say what you've seen with her, things that she's disclosed to you. So be prepared to handle a disclosure, and that can be really heavy. And I can even tell you that in the time that I've been at Three Oaks, over the course of the pandemic, just helping out the shelter staff and going in and working the crisis line, it still hits you when the person finally realizes that what she's lived through is abuse, or you're the first person that she told. It's really, really heavy. So talk to somebody about it after she just does disclose to you. And if she just wants to ramble and talk and just go on and on, just listen to her and give her that space to do so. Continuing to reassure her, I believe you, I hear you. Ask her what she wants, what it is that she wants in that moment. Ask her what support she has. You might find that a lot of women will say, I don't have anyone I can call. I have nowhere to go. That's probably not her fault. That's probably a byproduct of the abuse, that he's isolated her away from anyone that could help her. And that would be your opportunity to then talk about Three Oaks Foundation and go into, I was able to speak with Kristin at Three Oaks Foundation. Would you like me to make that phone call with you? Just be prepared that the staff at the other end of the line, being that we're self-referring, are going to ask to talk to her as well. Now, Stella, I don't remember, are the volunteers able to transport her to Three Oaks?
Yep.
Is that part of it? Right, okay. So there's that option too, to let her know.
With COVID, that's at the discretion of the volunteer, whether they feel comfortable doing that. But in pre-COVID, yes, that transportation piece was with the exception that the accused was arrested and not at large. So if the accused was not known,
you're not going to put them in. And we don't do that either at the shelter. We have funding for Central Taxi to go and bring the woman to us. So again, every situation might be a bit different, and depending on what you're comfortable with. But it's knowing where he is. And sometimes women don't want to even tell you who the abuser is. If she's going to access her services, we will have to ask that of her. That's for safety reasons, for the physical safety, her safety, staff safety, other women's safety. Mm-hmm. We have a lot of service providers that come in to do a lot of work at the shelter. And from time to time, we've had to terminate those services because he's worked for a company that repairs something at the shelter. But your safety is important as well. And chances of police are already there when you're there. Police,
I was just going to say that that was what I was going to elaborate.
They'll transport women to the shelter. It gets hard because sometimes women don't want the police there, and I understand that, right? Like they may have a history of the police. I'm not speaking ill of the police. I'm just speaking from a woman's perspective. Police have been involved before, but he's not been held accountable, or that she's afraid of the police. Who knows what's going on? But really just talk to her, ask her what she wants. What she wants and what you think she needs may not coincide, may not make sense, but she should be in charge of her choices. And I won't get into duty to report because I'm sure you handle that at your end, and go from there. Okay, lastly, okay. So important to remember that when victims do feel judged, they are much less likely to ask for help. So I know I've made mistakes before and I've said things out loud. That's me. I sometimes just talk and don't think, but I feel like I'm getting better the longer I work at the shelter, especially being in public education. We're human. We're going to say things and we're going to make mistakes. It's okay to say, okay, sorry, I didn't mean it that way. And just rephrase things to her, let her know, because there's going to be a lot of stress going on with when you're called out to the scene anyways, because you really don't know what's going on until you arrive. So yeah, again, avoiding judging the situation or offering any advice. Maybe yourself, you have experienced violence. You may know somebody that you helped, but please try to refrain from, when my friend was in this situation, again, just do the referral to us and go from there. It can be a really difficult situation, but to take care of yourself as always after any of these calls or any of these situations that you get to. And again, making sure that the offender is always away from her should you have any of these conversations. So when you arrive at the shelter, again, with COVID, again, it might just depend on the staff that's at the shelter at the time, what their comfort level is. You'll be, depending on how long you're going to be there, if she wants you to sit there with her during her intake, that's kind of, I guess, up to you whether you stay or not. We typically would invite you into the front part of the main shelter, just so it feels a little bit like a safe, warm handover instead of you're just dropping her at the door and going. As of right now, you might have your temperature taken, you'll go through COVID screening. Again, it just all depends on the staff that's at the door and the woman. Maybe she wants you to drop her off and she never wants to see you again. Sometimes that happens at Three Oaks too. Women often don't want people to know that this is a services they're seeking. So they want that kind of relationship cut right at the end. So I had to get over that very quickly when I started at the shelter with seeing some women in public. Like they ignore me, they snub me, but that's okay because that's their choice. Because if people know I work for Three Oaks, they don't want other people knowing who I am and how they know me. So any questions?
One thing I may have or that I just want to say, and I know you've touched on it, but I'm always surprised by when I tell people in this plain language that you don't need to be residing at the shelter to access shelter support, that they have a lot of outreach programs, that you don't need to be staying there in order to benefit from some of the supports or majority of the supports that you offer. I feel like that's a big misconception with many of the folks that I speak with, that they don't have that understanding. And so I feel if you can say that in clear, plain language to them, it's very helpful.
Yeah, and to be able to say, and then you could talk about, Three Oaks has these services. Did you know that you can be in the community and work and live your life and have an outreach counselor? So they will now, I guess the silver lining, I guess we could say, with COVID is that with virtual meets, women can, you'd still have to call the crisis line, follow through that process. And then you would fill it like a referral, and it would go through, and depending on either where you live or you work in Hastings County, you'd be assigned to an outreach counselor. So yes, you can access those services. And sometimes that's the best thing for women because especially if they have children, they don't want to relocate the children into the shelter because that might mean they change schools. So that's a bigger conversation around that kind of service. But yet you can live in the shelter, you can have access to our transitional support worker who would help with housing or, I guess, life skills development, and our family court support worker that works with women through any family court process, filling out documents. That can be really daunting and really, really frustrating for a lot of our clients because either they're reliving their abuse or they are going up against a judge or a lawyer who has a lack of information around women's safety and domestic violence. But definitely you do not need to be in the shelter to access those services. And women can call the crisis line. And I know I said that at the beginning multiple times before she actually wants to be a client of Three Oaks. So there's some clients that we just know by voice when they call, and we don't know her name, but we know that she's called to create safety plans or to say, okay, this is coming up, what can I do now? But the crisis line is available for anyone to call. I know I've spoken to moms and dads who they know they're going to visit a daughter, they want to support a daughter. How can we help her? So that line is always there. And I guess kind of another thing on the side note of like not accessing our services, we often deal with a question around that we call CAS when a woman contacts the crisis line or stays in our shelter. That's not always true. Because we're a feminist organization, we really work with the client who's sitting in front of us. If there's things that are happening and she's choosing to remain with the abusive partner, but she's disclosed because of the information she disclosed, we will have that conversation with her and we will support her to use the Children's Aid Society on her side as an advocate. Now, I've had a situation in the shelter where we witnessed child abuse in the shelter. So that's a different story in and of itself, but it's still not me going into the office, picking up the phone, calling the Children's Aid. It's calling our manager, having another staff come in with me, because we want to help her. We really want to help and support her. And a lot of the times there's no other support in that woman's circle. So anyone that has kids right now and you're at home and you're working and you have children and you're trying to do your full-time job, you're online schooling kids, you have, like, I have 2 online, I have a toddler, we have pets, there's things always going on, and we want to talk with women and work them through the situation that they're experiencing, instead of building that brick wall up for her where she has 0 supports and she has to do it alone. So we are going to talk with the woman. We're going to support her. We don't just call CAS. That's sort of something that's always been in the community. And it's frustrating because that will limit people calling us if they hear those messages as well. But we do work with every woman with who she is, where she is, and what she's prepared to do. And again, safety planning is really huge for the work that we do, because every woman that comes to us has her own unique safety plan. And we have a lot of women that will deny or say no to doing a safety plan. And maybe 2 or 3 weeks into her stay into the shelter, she might say, oh, I've been safety planning all this time. Why was I so resistant to it? But I think it's another step of acknowledging her life and what she's experienced. Having to really think about her route to work, thinking about when she's going to do a pick up and drop off of the kids, even going to visit her family. So I don't know if I said this at the beginning, we're a 16-bed shelter, but because of COVID, we're down to 5 beds available throughout Hastings and Prince Edward County. And what's really significant to know about that number is that we're funded we're funded to provide safe shelter to 130 women a year and 65 children. However, since I've taken over as training ed since 2017, 2 or 3 of those years, we've been up over 210 women. So when we go down from 16 beds available to now 5, we have to talk about referrals. So should you ever be working with a woman and we don't have space, if it's immediate safety, we'll allow you to come into our building if she's okay to come into the building. Make referral phone calls from the safety of kind of like our entranceway office, so that you're not doing it on a roadside in a car in the middle of the night. You can come into our office and make those referrals. So for us, we would refer to Red Cedars in Shannonville, Napanee, Interval House, Cobourg, or Kingston. They're the next closest violence against women shelters to us. So it's not like, sorry, we're closed or we're full. We're going to provide you with these referrals. Our house would be one other place that we might refer to, but we would always provide a referral for someone. So that's
well,
3
just
Oaks
in the
in 20
interest
minutes.
just in the interest of time, I have Ann Earle in the waiting room. So does
Okay, yeah, we
anyone have any quick questions? Yeah. Does anyone have any quick questions for Kristin at all?
So if you think of anything after Stella has my contact, and don't hesitate to ever ask anything. So
Awesome. Thanks for your time,
all right.
Kristin.
Yeah, no problem. Thank you.
Yeah.
Thanks,
Take care.
Kristin.
Thank you.
All right, we're bringing in Ann Earle. She is I'll let her give her title because I'm not sure what it is right now, but she works for Belleville Police Service. I have 6% and I'm plugged in and it doesn't seem to be working. So hopefully this doesn't get interrupted, but if there's a tech fail, you know that it's my iPad dying. And actually, I think you guys will be able to continue on. It will just be me that gets kicked out. So hopefully that's the case. Hello, Anne. Hello. I can't hear you yet, but I can see you.
Is that better?
That is, yes, we can now hear you. Lovely. Thank you for joining us.
You're welcome. Thanks for having me.
You can just take it away and
Who
let
do we
me know
have
when
today?
and what. So we have new recruits. We have a few seasoned volunteers that are just getting some refresher information. And then we also have Diane, who is going to be my replacement while I go on maternity leave. She's coming up as Jennifer Cormier right now. If you want to give a wave,
I was
Diane.
gonna say, you don't look familiar.
Yeah. I don't know if all of the new recruits know, but I'm expecting and I'm leaving at the end of the month. But
Say
we'll
the
go
month
over
was
that
yesterday, or is that like the end of June?
No, end of June.
All right.
End of June
Exciting.
is when my maternity leave starts. So
It's exciting.
we will be transferred and left in good hands with Diane, who is Jennifer on this call right now. So did you want to start with the video? Did you still want to do that?
Yeah, can you do that?
Yep. Hmm.
Well, on that happy note, that song drives me bananas, as you can well imagine. And you guys can you can go off mute because we can have an open conversation with this. It's not just me being the talking head and continuing on. The biggest thing to take away from that is that it basically sensationalizes violence. It makes it kind of sexy. It kind of, it's Rihanna and Eminem and it's okay. But I mean, unfortunately, that stuff happens on a regular basis, and it's obviously, you guys have talked about the power and control wheel, and it just sensationalizes it, right? So you see these younger impressionable people that that's, well, hey, look at that, it's not showing it as necessarily a bad thing because you're singing about it and you hear about different lyrics and different songs, and it's just, society has really gone far that way, and we need to, our job as police and frontline people need to bring it back, because but that song just drives me absolutely bananas, but that's one of many. My name is Earle Dempsey. I'm a detective with the Belleville Police Service. I am in my 27th year of policing and currently the domestic violence coordinator. I deal with high-risk offenders and sex offenders. Yeah, it's a pretty big glamour job, but I like what I do, and my job is to keep my community safe and work with lots of victims. This is so weird because nobody is saying anything back. I can't even hear you laugh at my jokes, so it's kind of, come on, Stella, put your mic on. Give me something here. This is just too weird for me. I don't care if there's kids in the background. I don't care if your dog's bark. I don't care. But I need some background noise because I feel like I'm just have my headphones on and singing to a song on the radio. That's what it kind of feels like. So yeah, you guys can take off mute, please. Just don't. You too, Rachel. Okay, so we have seen a huge influx in calls with COVID. I look at every incident, every call for service every day, and our calls are way up for domestics. Not necessarily the charges are up, but the calls are up because home is not necessarily a safe place, right? So you have all the kids at home, and you have, think about people that are working from home, and then they're trying to, I know a couple of people that I deal with, they're probation officers. And one girl has 3 small children, and she's trying to be a probation officer at home and do the online schooling for her 3 small kids. And she's just losing her shit because she's like, I don't know how people are doing it. And that's someone that has good coping skills and has good supports. So you're dealing with some people that we deal with some people that don't have those things in place, right? So the extra stress and the extra pressures and everything, people are feeling it. So home is not necessarily a safe place for a lot of people that we deal with. We have already had a domestic homicide this year, and it was on the east end of the city. No previous calls for service with this family. Nothing, like not even a call. They moved here probably 10, 15 years ago from Toronto. No involvement with police, nothing. And unfortunately, I'm not sure, that's obviously still, he's been charged, it's still before the courts, but I mean, stuff like that happens. You can't say it's like, oh, it's Belleville, because as you guys can know, that stuff happens pretty much everywhere, unfortunately. Your role is basically to help us. When I started in 1994, I don't think, because victim services was called C-Cares at that time, I don't think, do you know, Stella, roughly when it started in the 90s, I want to say, or early 2000s?
I think it was 95, 96 is when victim services launched.
Yeah.
I can't speak to when it launched here.
Yeah, so we were, I think it's probably late 90s, if not early 2000s, and it was called C-Cares. Because before that, if I went to a domestic, if I went to a sudden death, if I went to a homicide or a vehicular death, like it was, you're doing the investigation, you're trying to manage the victims, you're trying to control the scene, you're dealing with the accused. And then when victim services came in, and then also VWAP, which is the court support part for victims. So that's Victim Witness Assistance Program. So I really, let's just try to stay on track here, because usually I have an hour, so I can talk for as long as I want. Stella's like,
I put you last for a reason, Anne.
Oh, okay. I'm sure these guys, yeah. So everyone's going to be like, oh my God, but she just stopped talking. I'm done today. So before that, I had to look after everybody, right? So I'm dealing with all of the victims. And it wasn't fair, because unfortunately my first job is to get the scene under control, get the accused, find as much information as I can. But we were doing almost a disservice to the victims because we couldn't give them the attention and supports that they needed. So victim services started, and then actually we had a dedicated domestic court with Judge Hunter, and he started the VWAP, Victim Witness Assistance Program, started shortly after that. There's a dedicated domestic court, we had a domestic crown. Most of my stuff is going to focus on domestic, but also on how your role is to help us as well. But when that started, there were so many more supports for the victims, so they don't feel isolated, like, I don't know what's going on with my investigation, I haven't heard from the officer. They have support people in place. I mean, more than one Stella has texted me going or email me, hey, what's going on with this? You know, Jane Doe is asking, here's where it stands. Or let me find out from the officer and I'll get back to you. So that communication is very fluid. So that way the victim never feels like they're out in left fields and has no idea what's going on. So that's really important to us to have that supports in place for them. I hear little people.
Sorry.
Don't apologize. Don't apologize. Trust me. Any kind of background noise is good, because I'm just like, I feel like, is this on? Some calls that you go to might be hard for you because of your past experiences or past issues or whatever, and that's okay. And if you can't do it, that's okay. But your job is to support that victim. We will not call you if we don't think the situation is safe. So that's one thing for us, is we can't put you in that situation, because you can't risk putting another person at risk. So we will call you after the fact. I think the Belleville Police Service and Victim Services have a very good relationship, and we have, like I said, a very fluid communication. But at times it's after the fact that we get. So I'm just pulling something up for later. It's after the fact that I'm emailing Stella or I'm emailing Jennifer to say, this is what I got, can you help? Part of my role also is to deal with the frontline guys. And I say guys, it means all of the officers, because we have a very young service right now. So they need to know the importance of victim services. They need to know that they don't need to be charged. Like, you go to a situation and something is just not right, but there's not enough grounds to lay a charge, then we have to look at some other supports in place. When I started in 1994, it was still basically legal to beat your wife. The criminal code changed in 94, because prior to that, we needed the victim's cooperation in a domestic to lay a charge. You would go to a horrible situation, and unless she gave you a statement, there's nothing. You'd put a Band-Aid on it, and they go their separate ways and be back at it the next day. Now, when they changed the rule, the criminal code changed in 1994, we don't need the victim's cooperation. So if we go into a situation and there are, there's damage, there's visible injuries, I don't need her consent. I don't need her cooperation. I don't need her statement. It's great to have it, but I don't need it to proceed. So that takes the pressure off of the victim to feel like they're stabbing the spouse in the back or turning on them. He can be mad at me for the rest of his life. I don't give a shit. So I sleep fine at night. I'm good with that. So I don't care. So that way they can be mad at us instead of the victim. So that's very helpful. When that happens, we try to get as much corroborating evidence as we possibly can. But it's very rare that you be called to a domestic unless the victim's gone to the hospital and we can just make sure that the accused is secure and in custody. Unfortunately, right now, the court system, and I'm going to be very open with this, is failing victims miserably. They are unexpected releases. I never say, and I tell this to the frontline officers as well, never say, he's going to be, I'm going to say he, because most domestic offenders are male. He won't get out. He's being held for bail. You can't say that now because we have people released and you just like, well, I didn't see that coming. So, and Stella can speak to this, more than one occasion, I messaged her going, holy shit, he's out. We got it. Like oh my God, what are we doing? Usually it's on a Friday afternoon because we have everything else planned, but usually it's a Friday afternoon. One time Stella's using her own Visa card to buy a train ticket to get the chick out of town because we're like the shit factor was way up here. So yeah, Stella's using her own Visa to get her a train ticket because we got to get her out because we don't know where he is. And it's just, yeah. So the court system is not helping us to keep victims safe. One thing you need to remember when you're dealing with victims and of any kind of offense is that whatever happens in court will never seem like enough for the victim, right? Because again, it's, in my 27 years of policing, that's the part that drives me the most bananas. Courts need to be held accountable. JPs need to be held accountable, and they're not. And they're like, you basically have to stand on your head to get them held in custody, even if they have an enormous record. I have no problem going to court, which I don't do very often, but I will if I need to, if it's a high risk enough situation, and go on the stand saying, if you release this offender, I fear he will kill her. And I want to put that on the record because I want the JP to hear me. And I want them to be accountable because I want them to hear that this risk level is way, way up here. It's not just, and you hate to say typical domestic, because sometimes there are situations where, especially during COVID, the situation gets the best. Like there is added stress and pressure. And like I said before, with like online learning and kids and working from home, sometimes what we've seen is that we have no incidents with them and they just snap and there's a pushing and shoving or someone gets mad or they've broken something. Those are the lower level domestics, obviously. And 9 times out of 10, those people are going to get back together and that's okay, providing these things in place. And that's, the offender might have used the PARS program, which is partner assault response, something or other. It's counseling. So basically saying anger management for domestic situations. And that's okay. And the biggest thing is hardest to remember is not for us not to judge the victim because it's not our choice. It's not our life. We don't walk in their footsteps. We don't understand what they're going through. So in any situation that you go into, be as supportive as you possibly can because you don't know what they've gone through. And they could stay and go back 5, 6, 7, 8, 9 times, 10 times. If you deal, so you just had heard the girls from 3 Oaks. Who presented from the shelter, Stella?
Kristin.
Okay. So if you think about, okay, you have a woman, and let's not stereotype because domestic violence doesn't discriminate. It could be anybody. A few years ago, it was our chief, our former chief was assaulted by her husband. It could literally be anybody. So you have a professional woman who is now living in the shelter and she's got 2 teenage kids and they're pissed because I want to go home. I want to see my friends. Like, why did you do this? I miss my dad. I miss my stuff. I just want to go home. I'm in the shelter. That sucks. I hate you. Think about all those extra pressures that are on the woman. Even though she doesn't feel safe, She's going to go back because her kids want her to go back, because the kids want the life that they're missing. And they're pissed at her because she's made the choice to take them out. So it's not fair, but that's who here puts themselves above their kids? Nobody, right? So as women, and it's a fault of ours that we never put ourselves first. So the same thing goes with a victim in any situation. So be mindful of that as well. The other thing too we're seeing is there is a huge increase in drug abuse in the city, and I think it's the same in every city right now. But I went through the calls last night. So in a 24-hour period, we had 96 calls for service. This is from yesterday to today. I would say at least 75% of those are someone's stoned on the corner of Dundas and Charles at the laundromat. They're injecting, they're smoking up, or they're shooting up. There's a guy that is in the middle of traffic. He's got his pants down. He has no idea where he is. There's a girl in a tent underneath the balcony of an apartment building. So it's the homeless and the drug abuse is rampant in the city. And unfortunately, sometimes it's hard to be able to help them because sometimes it's lack of communication, obviously lack of available housing, but the drug abuse, it overdoses, it's really out of control. So that's another reason why you're not probably going to be called out right away to some stuff, because we need to make sure that the scene is safe for you as well, right? Okay. Stella, how are we making it so far?
You're doing fabulous.
Oh.
And technically, you have 8 minutes left, but we're just cruising right along.
Okay. What I try to tell the frontline people as well is that the difference between the Victim Witness Assistance Program and victim services is for a victim witness to help a victim, it has to be before the courts. They could be charged. They could be before the courts. They could be in custody. And that's when victim witness, we'll help the victim, keep them informed of the court case and that kind of stuff. A lot of the times it's a bit of a double with victim services and victim witness assistance program, and the frontline do get them mixed up sometimes. But what I remind the frontline is that the police don't have to be involved for victim services to help the victim of any situation. They can do safety planning, they can help out, they can tap into resources, counseling, all that stuff. So that's super, super helpful to know that when you have that feeling that, you know what, situation's not good, but there's nothing physically we can do, then I remind them, you know what, fill out the referral, send it to victim services, or tell me and I'll call and make the phone call. The difference is that we need the consent for the victim. That being said, sometimes I don't have it. And I'm calling anyway because, yeah, totally guilty. Because I'm so concerned about the victim that I'm trumping that with her safety. So I'm just like, you know what, Stella, I need some help because this is not okay. And I don't think it's bit me yet. I say yet because eventually it could. But Stella, I don't think it's bit me yet. Like, I mean, I think anytime that we've done that, or it's going to be a verbal consent, but I just don't want them to leave them way out there in left field by themselves, because that's not fair, right? Yeah. What else?
Talk about or give an example of, like, when volunteers arrive on scene, what's helpful steps for them to take in order to, like, connect with the like who's taking the lead on scene and how they can be most beneficial for police. Because sometimes, like, you're so busy kind of trying to keep the scene safe, deal with the accused, that you just kind of want us to come in and assume that role. But if you can kind of paint that picture for them, would be helpful.
So when we call you, a question that you should ask is, who do I see at the scene? Who's in charge? Who do I call at the scene, or who do I look for at the scene? And then, do you guys wear vests or anything that identifies you? Like, you have lanyards, but you have any, like, kind of,
Depends
not
on
orange
the
traffic
scene.
vest or anything, but I mean something that
They do. They do have like a traffic vest, but normally they just wear that if it's like outside or like
Right.
on the 401, something like that. Normally, if it's a domestic's home, we try not to identify ourselves with big flashy things.
Fair.
So yes and no to that question.
All right. So if you're called, you say, you know, who am I going to speak with Detective Earle? So you go to the scene. Obviously, you need to stay back a bit, because the biggest thing to us too is also if we need to preserve evidence, we don't want you walking into a situation, regardless if it's a domestic or anything else. Stay back, get someone's attention. It can be a junior officer that's doing the perimeter, and to say, I'm looking for Detective Earle, I'm from Victim Services. And then they're going to call me, or they're going to come and get me, and then we'll come and get you. Okay, so do it that way, and be patient, because we need to make sure that, like I said, it's safe for you guys to get there. Stella, did you talk about that incident from back in April when there was a bit of a glitch in the whole communication system?
No, this is our first like in training session today, and it's just been juiced with people chatting. We'll do more kind of case examples later on at a later date, but you can jump into that if you want.
Okay, so again, with my stuff, I do training with every officer on the front line. So once they've been back from the police college, they're with their training officer for at least 3 months, and then they're on their own. So when they're with the training officer, they're basically shadowing the officer and saying, you know, going to this call, going to that call. And then the training officer will shadow them and say, okay, how are you going to handle this? How are you going to handle that? When they are out on their own, it's kind of like throwing the baby bird out of the nest, right? Here you go. I try to meet with them, and I do some one-on-one or two-on-one domestic training. So I go over all the forms, because there is a ridiculous amount of paperwork with policing. I go over all the forms and say, this is why you need to do this referral. This is why you need to do this referral. This is the purpose of this form. This is what Victim Services can do for your victim. So I go through all of that with them. It's like, don't be afraid to call them. And in our system as well, when we do certain types of calls, there's a task that says, you know, Victim Services card or Victim Services referral. It's got to be yes or no, because there are certain calls that we have to say, you know, the Victim Services are here for you, or we give them a card that says, if you want to make a phone call, here's some number for you. And then part of that is when I go through the instance next day, if it's serious enough, I'm going to email the officer and say, hey, what about Victim Services? Or like I said, I'm just going to supersede that. I'm just going to call Stella or Jen or whoever, and we're going to go ahead and get the victim some extra supports. So back in April, I really try to push communication between the frontline and for me. If there's any issues, please call me, let me know, send me an email, let me look into it. If you think that you've done everything you possibly can, but there's something that's not right, let me know, and I'll see what other resources that I can tap into to see how I can help. So back on the 13th of April, officers attended an address. I'm just looking this way because it's on a different screen, for a domestic. The male was really, really intoxicated, extremely confrontational with police, and displaying very aggressive behavior towards the police and the involved female. The involved female was safely removed from the residence and driven down the road while they tried to develop a safety plan for her. She did not have any friends or family in the area. She grew up outside the city and was relatively new to Belleville. And it was, unfortunately, it's kind of like the perfect storm of mess ups, because they had called another agency for support. So when we deal with domestics, and unfortunately the person that they spoke to said that they can't take any clients on a one-night basis, and that they're only dealing with clients requiring long-term living arrangements, which was not true. They called another agency and said the female would have to come and complete a 14-day quarantine, which wasn't going to work because she has a job and she had to go to work every day. They called another agency and said that they do not deal with domestics. And then they also called the shelter. There was no beds at the shelter. And lastly, a call was played to Victim Services. There are different agencies, obviously, that we deal with. So these officers were quite junior, but they did everything right. So they called Victim Services, and after waiting approximately half an hour for a return phone call, they were informed that they have no options for the female in need and suggested she stay in the lobby of the police station. So, yeah, like, that's not good. However, does stuff like this happen? Not very often, but it does happen. But because we have such a good working rapport with all of these agencies, and they sent me the copy of this. I said, I'm not sure what you can do, but this is what I've got. And I'm like, are you shitting me? Because I know that that's not okay. And I know that that's not how those, like, more than one of those agencies work. So it's just, like I said, kind of like the perfect storm of mess ups. So the girl did stay here, but her boss ended up having a camper trailer in his driveway, and she stayed there, but she literally had no supports in the area. So I called Kelsey, I want to say, and then I also spoke with Jennifer, And Jennifer was just like, yeah, we're on it. Obviously, they talked to you, Stella, and you looked after some additional stuff and some training, because that's what is the process, Stella?
Well, I can't comment on the comment made of staying in
No.
that piece, but in circumstances with domestics, we can provide financial assistance to put individuals in a hotel, which is what the officer was inquiring about. I think there was a breakdown in what information was shared in regards to the incident, because our training for our team leads, there has to be charges laid. And because there was no charges laid, they were kind of taking off that financial support off the table. But again, it was a perfect storm of things that information not shared or that created the issue. In an ideal world, we would have just put her up in a hotel, but there was no charges laid. So that's what kind of made it a little bit of a hiccup on our end.
But because, like I said, because there's a good communication between all of these agencies, I contacted Jennifer, I contacted the ED from a couple other agencies who were like, yeah, nope, this is done, this is this way, and this is that way. And information was sent back to me that I've sent back to the front line. And they were extremely happy with the response that they received from victim services and the other agencies. And they're just like, wow, that's great. Like, thank you so much. I'm like, no, like I need to know those things so we can fix it so that that doesn't happen to anybody else.
And you continue to utilize us, because I feel when
absolutely.
those things happen, then it creates this foul taste in the officer or the platoon's mouth. And then there's a breakdown, they don't use us anymore. And then our new recruits can't get it on scene because we're not being referred.
Right. So after that, I actually sent the response to the entire platoon and said, this is what the Executive Director of Victim Services has to say about what happened with that call. And they're just like, thank you very much. And then to be on the safe side so that they're not bitching and chewing to like, oh, I call Victim Services and look at the friggin' thing that I got. I sent it to all the uniform division so that this is the incident. This is what happened with a whole bunch of different agencies. Again, perfect storm of crap. And then this is the response that we got. So the other agencies that we dealt with also responded. So all of that was sent to the front line going, and that's why it's so important for that communication back and forth. But if you are in a scene and there's issue, you need to let Stella or Jen or, I'm sorry, Debbie, no. Diane. So I had the D, I'm sorry. Let her know so that we can fix it, right? If there's any issues or like, I got there and they turned me around. Yeah, no, I mean, be patient. Yeah, like I said, find out who you're supposed to contact and then we'll go from there. One of my experiences with victim services was 15 years ago, where we had a gentleman that committed suicide. And he had left a suicide note. He's gone for a couple of days. And we found his car and then did some walking. And unfortunately, we found him deceased by a gunshot wound. His wife was from Quebec. English was not great, and his little girl was 4 years old and was the most beautiful little girl. It's probably one of the worst days of my career, but you guys were there and beyond helpful. Like, it's just that had to be the extra person while I'm trying to figure out what's going on and do my investigation on my end, and that you guys are there and a huge support. Funny story about that is that turns out, and she calls herself the stray that I took home from work, because I had went to the funeral to pay my respects because the little girl was amazing, and I just felt so bad because I had to tell her that her dad was dead at 4 years old, and that he was an angel, so that was horrible. Went to the funeral to pay my respects. About a week later, I'm at the pirate ship playground with my 3-year-old daughter. And she's running around, and you can well imagine, as a police officer's daughter, I'm a bit of a hover parent, right? So my 3-year-old is playing in the pirate ship, and I'm literally doing this. And I'm scanning, and I'm looking around the corner, making sure that she's never out of my sight. Well, she was underneath in the pirate ship because she's like friggin' this high. And I start to panic, and I can't see her. So I start walking closer, and she walks out, and she's holding hands with this little girl. She's like, "Mama, I have a new best friend." And it was the same girl. It was Chloe. It was a little girl that I told her dad was dead the week before. And they're still friends. It's very cute. Yeah. Chloe spends lots of time in my house. I'm sorry, it's very cute. And yeah, happy ending. I say that all the time, but I never cry. Fuck. I'm sorry. Anyway, yeah, Chloe's a fantastic kid, and yeah, big part of our lives. So there you go.
But I think introducing victim services at that point helped lessen the impact
Oh, absolutely.
of the
Yeah.
crisis around
Yeah.
them, right? Like that extra support, the extra ability to help soften the information they were receiving and be able to kind of provide those just basic needs, whether it's providing comfort or making difficult phone calls, letting other family members
Yeah, and
know.
that's what they were doing. So I think one of the volunteers actually spoke French, which was a huge bonus.
Mhm.
He was a male volunteer and he spoke French. The other female, she's making tea, and you know, I mean, obviously the wife was extremely upset, but we're trying to get a hold of her in-laws or his husband's family in Odessa, and just so it was hugely helpful. So I'm doing my part and I'm gathering that information while the volunteer is making tea and just trying to keep everything and it's having that calming effect, because as soon as I ask a hard question, it's bringing everything back, right? So there's that. So that's huge, and that's yeah. So
and one thing I mentioned to the volunteers is that you're not necessarily going to feel that sense of, not that you volunteer to feel a sense of accomplishment, but that you're doing a good job, because you don't necessarily get that reciprocated from the people you're supporting because they are so checked out, and rightfully so, but you'll definitely get that appreciation from the police or fire or EMS or who you're helping provide that comfort and support to what they want to do but can't do.
And you need to remember that you're dealing with someone that's probably the worst day of their life.
Yeah.
Right. So that's the hardest part. You also need to be aware of, obviously, if you haven't talked about it yet, Stella will, about it triggering you and being aware of having some issues. And because the stuff that we see, thankfully, they're making leaps and bounds with mental health, with frontline and first responders. But the stuff you see isn't normal, right? And the stuff that you're going to deal with isn't normal. So you need to be very aware of that and to make sure that you take care of yourself, because that's a really hard piece as well, because that's not normal, right?
Mm-hmm.
So that's huge.
We'll get to the debriefing piece later on, but yes.
Any questions?
But you are 10 minutes over almost, so we will.
I know, that's why I said any
folks if they-
questions. I said any questions.
If anybody has any questions, and then we'll conclude for the day. No, not the day.
Thanks for putting me
for
last.
2 hours.
Yeah.
Well, if there's no questions, and
Crickets,
thank you
nothing
for
but
making time
crickets.
for us.
You're welcome.
You're just so thorough. They don't have any questions. You're so thorough.
Well, I have like a whole PowerPoint, but Stella's like, you realize you got half an hour. I'm like, I know, but if you want to send my PowerPoint out, you can do that, and you can send things out.
Well, when I scanned and I got to slide 47, I was like, there's no way that's giving you a slide a minute. No, not even, less than that. I'm like,
I'm from the
this
East
isn't
Coast. I can
happening.
talk pretty quick. I can get through all my slides in half an hour easily.
No,
I could.
that's
Yes,
too
I
much.
could, Vera.
It was all about me, and I wasn't
Challenge
putting that much
accepted.
pressure on myself. Yeah. Anyways,
So,
thanks again. It was good to see you
You're
virtually.
welcome. And hopefully I'll see you before the end of June.
Yes, hopefully.
All right, you guys take care.
This week.
Have
Yeah,
a good
thanks.
day. Bye-bye.
Thank you for. That's what I was anticipating, was my phone or my computer dying. Look at that. I had a backup plan. You guys were all on my phone. Can you hear me? Okay, perfect. I still have my headset in, but it's connected to my computer that's dead. So that was like literally the best timing. Hopefully I see a lot of you again tonight at 6. DV Sarp and Interval House, Napanee Interval House will be speaking. And then we have a few of our volunteers coming on as well to share their best and worst calls. And then I'm thinking we'll plan probably another Zoom next week to go over more of the fine details about debriefing, the paperwork, those kind of pieces as well. These next few sessions are just going to be absorbing as much information as you can and all the little nuggets, and seeing how all these networking community partners work together and supporting someone during crisis and a traumatic event.
Any questions for me? I can only see like Brittany, Jennifer, and Shiloh. So if anybody else has questions, you need to raise your
I
hand or
don't,
unmute
Stella.
yourself.
I don't. I'm good. Thank you.
Hold on. Now I can't even hear you. Give me a second. Somebody try talk now.
It was just me making bad jokes. So it's okay.
Give me a second. My headset is connecting. This is what I'm gonna do between now and 6 o'clock is charge everything. That will be the first thing. Thanks, Sean. Typing in the chat is helpful. Is anybody else hot? Because I'm sweating. Shiloh, see you at 6. Thank you. This is just painful. This headset is not connecting and I can't hear anything. So
Can
we
you
will
hear
just
me?
see you later. I'm gonna end it. Thanks,
Can you hear
ladies
me, Stella?
and gentlemen. We'll see you soon.